Who was Michelangelo?
Michelangelo Buonarroti, 1475 to 1564, was a multi-talented great master of the High Renaissance, known for his painting, sculpture, and architecture. He had an incredibly long and successful career, active for nearly 70 years. He was 20 years younger than Da Vinci and well respected during his lifetime. Though notorious for being moody and difficult to work with, he was one of the first artists in art history to be famous. 2 biographies were written about him, and he was highly sought after by high-status patrons, including Lorenzo de' Medici and the Pope. His most famous works include his painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and his awe-inspiring sculptures such as the Pietà, which he made when he was 24 years old, and the David. He also designed the dome on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, though he died before its construction was completed.
Why was Horatio Greenough's sculpture of George Washington so controversial?
Horatio Greenough, 1805 to 1852, was a neoclassical sculptor and artist, and is considered to be the first professional American sculptor. His grand marble sculpture of President George Washington was modeled after a sculpture of Zeus at Olympia by Phidias, an ancient Greek sculptor, and depicts the first president semi-nude, wearing a Roman toga, and seated in a lion throne. His right arm points up towards heaven in a pose similar to Raphael's depiction of Plato in the Renaissance fresco, The School of Athens. Greenough's purpose with this pose was to emphasize Washington's role as a military leader and philosopher. When the sculpture was displayed in the Capitol Rotunda in 1841, however, the public found it shocking and inappropriate, and some even found it funny. The sculpture fell into disrepair and was eventually moved to the Smithsonian. It can now be seen at the National Museum of American History.
What is an artist's medium?
The term medium, pl. media, refers to the materials used to create a work of art. Types of media can range widely, and include different types of paint, such as oil or acrylic paint, on canvas, as well as ink, marble, concrete, wood, glass, and metal. Artists also rely on various types of technology to create prints, photographs, videos, sounds, and digital images. The term mixed media refers to works that are made with more than one type of material. 20th-century artist Robert Rauschenberg's combined pieces are a good example of mixed media work. His 1959 work, Canyon, is often referred to as a painting, but is made with oil paint, pencil, paper, metal, photograph, fabric, wood, for canvas. Buttons, mirrors, a stuffed eagle, a pillow tied with cord, and a paint tube.
Where is the ancient Near East?
The ancient Near East is a term used by art historians to refer to the area near the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, also called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means the land between two rivers. The ancient Near East is also thought of as the cradle of civilization, as it is here that urban society developed for the first time. With it came the invention of writing and laws. The first examples of epic poetry, the construction of cities, and of course, monumental art and architecture.
Why did Veronese get into so much trouble?
Veronese, 1528 to 1588, was the nickname of Paolo Cagliari, a painter from Verona who made his career in Venice during the second half of the 16th century. Many of his paintings celebrate the ornate architecture of the city and the well-heeled lives of its nobility. His seemingly harmless painting, Feast in the House of Levi, however, got him into trouble with the Catholic Inquisition. The painting was originally called The Last Supper, with Christ depicted in the center of a large, ornate hall, dining with a rather rambunctious crowd. The enormous painting, which is 18 feet tall and 42 feet long, included images of drunkards, a man with a bloody nose, cats, dogs, parrots, dwarves, and Germans, all of which the Inquisition found unacceptable in a painting of such a holy scene.
What was the Chicago School?
The Chicago School is a name given to a group of architects and designers working in Chicago around the turn of the century, including Daniel Burnham, 1846 to 1912, William L. E. Baron Jenney, 1832 to 1907, and Louis Sullivan, 1856 to 1924. One of the greatest engineering innovations associated with the Chicago School is the development of the steel-framed skyscraper. The use of iron and steel allowed engineers to build ever taller buildings, usually for commercial purposes. Some of the earliest skyscrapers include the Home Insurance Building, 1884, and the 10-story Rand McNally Building, designed by Burnham and Root in 1889.
What are some significant examples of 18th-century neoclassical architecture?
Chiswick House, designed and built between 1724 and 1729 by Robert Boyle, the 3rd Earl of Burlington in West London, England. Greatly inspired by the architect Palladio and his Villa Rotunda. Chiswick House features an octagonal dome and a large but simple portico with an empty pediment. The overall style is restrained, flat, and symmetrical. Pulteney Bridge designed by celebrated Scottish architect, Robert Adam, 1728–1792. Who also designed great buildings such as the Edinburgh City Chambers and Culzean Castle in Ayrshire, Scotland. The unique, Palladian-style Pulteney Bridge. Completed in 1773, crosses the River Avon in Bath, England, and is lined with shops. Théâtre de l'Odéon, originally called the Théâtre Français. This austere neoclassical building was designed by Marie-Joseph Payer between 1767 to 1770. Almost completely void of decoration. The portico features columns of the simplest Tuscan order and has no pediment. The building emphasizes its horizontality and geometric symmetry. Monticello, designed by Virginia's Statements and author of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, as his private residence in Charlottesville between 1769 and 1782. With later redesigns between 1796 and 1908. Jefferson was interested in developing a uniquely American style of architecture that would promote patriotism and help to form the new country's national identity.
Where did art begin?
Most traditional art history survey textbooks and courses begin with the prehistoric art of Europe and the Near East. It is convention, as much as anything else, and fits within the mostly chronologic presentation of the history of art in this book. Do note, however, that art itself did not begin in Europe. There is no single place where art began. Examples of prehistoric art can be found around the globe.
Who was Henry Moore?
Henry Moore, 1898 to 1986, was one of the most significant modernist sculptors, and arguably the most important British sculptor of the 20th century. His work was influenced by non-Western art, especially Mayan art. His abstractions of the human form, such as Reclining Figure, 1929, were directly inspired by Chicmul figures, which also recline, from Chichen Itza in Mexico. Representations of reclining forms, family groups, and mother and child pairs were an enduring subject for the artist. Moore's style is described as biomorphic, meaning that his figural abstractions are often soft, undulating, and organic. He also produced large sculptures that were hollow and pierced, emphasizing the mystery of negative space. Moore was incredibly prolific in his later years, requiring teams of assistants to produce monumental works of public sculpture, which can be seen around the globe.
What is the significance of the recumbent Buddha?
The Buddha is occasionally depicted reclining on his side with an arm tucked under his ear, while the other arm stretches the length of his body. This body positions indicates the parinirvana, or death of the Buddha. In the Southeast Asian tradition, also popular in China and Japan. In Sri Lanka, a 46-foot-long sculpture of the recumbent Buddha was carved from a single massive rock at a temple site known as Galvihara. Made sometime between the 11th and 12th centuries, this monumental representation of the Buddha's parinirvana shows the holy man surrounded by a smaller-scale mourner, likely his cousin, Ananda. A small pillow, carved from stone, supports the Buddha's head. His face is round, and his thin robes appear to cling to his body in the traditional iconographic manner.
What was the armory show?
In 1913, the Armory Show introduced America to European modernism. The Armory Show was actually called the International Exhibition of Modern Art, which was held at the 69th Regiment Armory in New York City. It was organized by the Association of American Painters and Sculptors and displayed a range of styles, from American realism to Impressionism to European modernism. Although European modernism made up a small portion of the art in the exhibition, it made shockwaves among American viewers and critics. The Fauve works by Matisse, and the Cubism of Picasso and Braque were highly criticized. Marcel Duchamp's nude descending the staircase was deemed to look like a pile of twigs. Despite this sensational backlash, which attracted thousands of visitors to both the New York and the additional Chicago location, the Armory Show made an unprecedented impact on American avant-garde artists and collectors, marking the beginning of modernism's dominance of the American art scene throughout much of the 20th century.
What is color?
Scientifically, color is the result of various wavelengths of light perceived by the human eye. The range of colors present in a rainbow, which transitions from red to violet, make up the visible spectrum. In art terms, the word color is interchangeable with the word hue. The primary colors, or primary hues, are red, yellow, and blue. Combinations of primary colors form all other hues. Two primary colors are blended to form secondary hues such as green and orange. There are even tertiary colors, which are made up of a blend of at least three hues.
What is the Silla crown?
Though influenced by the art and culture of China, Korean art is distinct and has a long history. Around 100 BCE, a kingdom known as the Silla Kingdom took control over most of the Korean peninsula. The Scylla crown is a gold and jade headpiece likely made somewhere between the 5th and 6th centuries CE, made from sheets of gold and adorned with jewels and spangles. The upright styling of the crown has been linked to either trees or antlers, which symbolize life and supernatural power. It is possible that this crown was either ceremonial, or never meant to be worn at all.
What is the classical pantheon?
The ancient Greeks and Romans were polytheistic, which means that they believed in many gods, each with different attributes and personalities, and collectively referred to as the Greek and Roman pantheon. The human-like classical gods and goddess were frequently depicted in ancient art, and temples were built in their honor. Greek name, Roman name description: Zeus, Jupiter, ruler of the gods, often depicted holding a lightning bolt. Reigns from Mount Olympus, Hera, Juno, wife of Zeus and goddess of marriage. Often jealous as Zeus had many affairs, Aphrodite, Venus, goddess of beauty, love, and sex, mother of Cupid. Known for frequent love affairs with gods and mortals, Apollo, son of Zeus and twin brother to Artemis. God of the sun, music, archery, prophecy, and poetry, Athena, Minerva, patron goddess of Athens. Goddess of wisdom, weaving, and art, Demeter, Ceres, goddess of fertility and harvest, her daughter. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades and taken to the underworld, Hades, Pluto, god of the underworld. Ares, Mars, god of war, Hermes, Mercury, messenger god, often depicted with a winged helmet. Artemis, Diana, virgin goddess of the hunt and wilderness, Poseidon, Neptune, god of the sea, depicted carrying a trident.
What is a fate galante?
A fate galante is a type of Rococo painting that depicts aristocrats engaging in a small, elegant party. Usually in a beautiful outdoor location, and often involving some kind of amorous, if not erotic activities. This type of painting was first introduced by Jean-Antoine Watteau in the early 18th century. And his work, A Pilgrimage to Cythera, 1717, is a good example. The mythical island of Cythera is the location of the birth of Aphrodite, who was formed by sea foam. To the far right, a statue of Aphrodite, also known as Venus, is decorated with flowers. Just below, a group of dreamy, well-dressed aristocrats hold hands and sit close. Some embracing, in an apparent homage to the Greek goddess of love. Further to the left, a fairy, shaped like a scallop shell and draped with a pink cloth, waits to take the reluctant visitors off the island. Pink cherubs float overhead and the sky is tinged with the color of sunset. Watteau's painting reflects the Rococo style with its silky, powdery texture, amorous themes, and aristocratic focus. With A Pilgrimage to Cythera, Watteau created an entirely new category of painting, the fate galante.
What is cyclic sculpture?
The cyclic culture, c. 3000 to 1200 BCE, is known for its ceramic figurines. Cyclic artisans made their pieces out of various materials, from poor quality clay to marble, and represented humans, animals, and other forms. Some of the most well-known cyclic sculptures are of women. These pieces can range in size and are highly abstract and stylized. The surfaces are smooth with little carved detail. Facial features and other details would have been painted. In many examples, a figurine's only facial feature is a nose, while arms are crossed over the chest, as if the figure is either asleep or dead. One side of the figure is flat and the toes are pointed, an indication that the piece was meant to lie on its back. In fact, many of these sculptures have been found near graves, raising the possibility that they served a funerary purpose, though their exact function is unknown.
What is the Proto-Renaissance?
The Proto-Renaissance, essentially meaning pre-Renaissance, is a term art historians use to describe a change in the style of art towards the end of the Gothic period, in which art begins to foreshadow the characteristics of the Renaissance in terms of naturalism, realism, and humanism. Different art history books will cite different date ranges for the Proto-Renaissance, but it is generally considered to begin during the end of the 12th century and end during the early 14th century in Italy. Work by artists such as the Lorenzetti brothers, Simone Martini, Duccio, Cimabue, and Giotto represent key shifts in style from Gothic to Renaissance. Famous writers and poets of the age include the poet Petrarch, who wrote love sonnets that went on to influence Shakespeare. Another poet, Dante Alighieri, wrote the Divine Comedy, an epic tale of the author's descent into hell.
What is the Ananda Temple?
The Ananda Temple is the most famous and spiritually significant Buddhist shrine in Burma and was built in the early 12th century by the leader Kyanzitta during the pagan period, which lasted from the 11th to 14th centuries. The temple is notable for its cruciform shape and tall central spire, which is 165 feet high. The temple is decorated with additional small spires, spikes, and 4 large sculptures of the Buddha, each reaching a height of approximately 35 feet. The lavish ornamental architecture of the Ananda Temple reflects the flourishing of Buddhism in Burma at the time of its construction.
What does a Hindu temple look like?
Hindu temples are one of the primary examples of Hindu architecture in India and Southeast Asia. They are usually built of cut rock, and although there is a great deal of stylistic diversity, are generally placed within two categories, northern and southern style. Hindu temples are raised on a podium, somewhat like an Etruscan temple, called a plinth. Temples in the northern style feature a large tower in the shape of a beehive, called Shikhara, which means mountain peak. Atop the tower is a rounded form known as an amulaka because of the similarly shaped umla fruit. These amalakas are used to decorate lower portions of the Shikhara as well. The halls of a northern-style temple have a series of halls called mandapas, which lead to the garbhagriha, an inner sanctuary used to house a sacred image. The halls are themselves decorated with smaller, tower-like roofs. An example of a northern-style Hindu temple is the Kandarya Mahadeva temple in Khajuraho, India, which was built around 1000 CE. Southern-style Hindu temples feature a pyramid-like tiered tower called a vimana, and this is topped with a round capstone. The halls of a southern-style temple also lead to an inner chamber, but have flat roofs and pillared mandapas. An example of a southern-style Hindu temple is the Rudraeshvara temple in Tanjavur, India, which was built around 1010 CE.
Who was Suleiman the Magnificent?
Suleiman I, known as Suleiman the Magnificent, 1494 to 1566. Ruled the Ottoman Empire from 1520 until his death. He was trained as a goldsmith and was a great patron of the arts. Under his rule, ceramics, calligraphy, manuscript illumination, metalworking, textiles, and architecture flourished. Suleiman supported a royal painting society, the Nakashkane, whose styles greatly influenced other artists throughout the Ottoman Empire. A good example of the Nakashkane style is in their design. For the Sultan's imperial signature, known as a tughara, it features bold, sweeping lines and ornate organic decoration done in ink and watercolor on paper. It incorporates both abstract design and calligraphy, and includes the name of the Sultan as well as the phrase "the eternally victorious."
What happened to the Venus de Milo's arms?
In 1820, the remains of the Venus de Milo were accidentally discovered by a farmer on the Greek island of Melos, from which the sculpture gets its name. Since then, the Venus de Milo has become one of the most famous works of art in the world. Many other broken fragments of marble were found in the same field, and some of those pieces may have been fragments of her arms. These pieces suggest that the Venus de Milo might have been holding an apple in her right hand. But, there is another theory. Rather than an apple, She may have been admiring herself in the reflection of a polished shield. The second theory does the best to explain why the Venus de Milo's left leg is slightly bent and her body somewhat twisted. Unfortunately, the fragments found with the statue are now lost. But it doesn't end here. The lovely statue finds herself in yet another controversy.
What is pointillism?
Pointillism is the name of a style most associated with the work of Georges Seurat, 1859–1891. Who was interested in color theory and experimented with complementary colors. Seurat studied classical color theory and the theories of 19th-century chemist Michel-Eugène Chevreul. In the Laws of Contrast Color, 1824, Chevreul explained that two adjacent colors would reflect each other's complementary color, the color on the opposite side of the color wheel. In his visual experiments, Seurat placed dots of pure color side by side in his paintings, with the idea that the viewer's eye would blend the colors together, according to the theory. Seurat called this technique divisionism. But art critics used the term pointillism, which is now more common. Seurat's most famous pointillist painting is A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, 1884–1886. This very large painting, over 10 feet long, is made up of thousands of distinct painted dots and depicts a relaxing leisure scene. Bourgeois Parisians relax along a riverbank. Well-dressed men, women, and children mill about on the grass. Some holding umbrellas, while others recline in the shade. The monumental scene has a rather formal style due to the pointillist technique, and the individual dots are quite clear when closely inspected. A number of artists, including Vincent van Gogh, experimented with pointillism, and other pointillist works include Maximilien Luce's Morning, Interior, 1890, and Family in the Orchard. 1890, by Theo van Rysselberghe, who went through a pointillist phase. Three Apples, 1878–79. Art courtesy the Barnes Foundation. Marion, Pennsylvania, USA/the Bridgman Art Library.
Why is medieval European painting so bad?
There is no question medieval painting is not particularly realistic. Much of it is simplistic, flat, and lacks natural proportion.
What happened? Did the medieval artists forget how to draw? Is this a result of the so-called Dark Ages?
Looking at medieval art from a contemporary perspective occasionally raises questions. about quality, but it is important to remember that medieval artists, including painters, were highly skilled craftsmen who worked meticulously on their designs. Medieval artists made specific choices about their work and were motivated not by realism, but by religion. In the 6th century, a debate arose amongst Christian church leaders as to whether or not figurative imagery was appropriate for religious art. Then, Pope Gregory the Great declared, "Painting can do for the illiterate what writing does for those who can read," as quoted in Gombrich 135. The goal of medieval art, according to Pope Gregory, was to simply and clearly depict religious themes. The quality of the artwork was not supposed to overshadow its religious content for fear of idol worship.
What is Mughal art?
The Mughals were Muslim leaders descended from Genghis Khan who ruled over the Indian subcontinent from 1526 to 1857. In fact, the word Mughal means descended from the Mongols. At its peak, the Mughal Empire stretched from India to Afghanistan. The classical Mughal period is associated with the rule of Akbar the Great, ruled 1556-1605. During this time, the arts flourished and there was relative peace throughout the empire. Akbar the Great was supportive of grand architectural projects, and was particularly fond of European etchings brought to him by Christian missionaries. His son and successor, Jahangir, supported royal workshops where artists produced immaculate illuminated manuscripts and miniatures paintings.
What is art brut?
Art brut, meaning raw art, is a term coined by French painter Jean Dubuffet, 1901 to 1985, in 1945 to describe outsider art, or art made by individuals without academic training, including the art of children, criminals, and the mentally ill. Along with surrealist André Breton and art critic Michel Tapie, Dubuffet founded the company de l'Art Brut, which collected art brut created by Swiss mental patients. This collection grew to over 2,000 works and was later donated by Dubuffet to the Swiss city of Lausanne. In 1971, Dubuffet, whose own art was greatly inspired by outsider art, was interested in spontaneity, originality, and freedom from the social constraints of art production.
What is a buy disc?
Although these circular pendants look like they could be worn as jewelry, they are much too bulky and heavy for such a purpose. Instead, they were likely used in ritual worship of the sky. Bi, pronounced B, discs were made of nephrite, a greenish stone similar to jade. Some were smooth, displaying only traces of the tool marks used to shape them. while others were elaborately decorated. A obelisk from the Zhou dynasty, 1100 to 221 BCE, was discovered in a tomb near Luoyang, China, and is intricately carved with dragons. The ancient Chinese regarded dragons as symbols of power who were thought to pass between heaven and earth and to bring rain. It would have taken many hours of difficult work to grind and polish the dragons and other abstract designs on the Zhou obelisk.
Who was Francis Bacon?
Francis Bacon, 1909 to 1992, was a British painter whose expressive, figurative works often depict scenes of psychological horror. Bacon is often categorized as an existentialist artist. His paintings of Pope Innocent X were modeled after a portrait done by Velázquez in the 16th century. However, Bacon's Pope sits within the confines of a cage-like throne. His face smeared with aggressive streaks of paint against a menacingly black background. Bacon's paintings depict intense scenes of anguish. The artist himself said, "I hope to make the best human cry in painting. To remake the violence of reality itself," as quoted in Stockstad 1128.
What is Aegean art?
The term Aegean art refers to the art of three major Mediterranean cultures which predate ancient Greece. The Cycladic culture, the Minoans, and the Mycenaeans. Together, these groups are referred to as the Aegean civilization and flourished during the Bronze Age. c. 3000 to 1200 BCE. The Cycladic culture established itself on a group of small islands known as the Cyclades, while the Minoans lived on the island of Crete. The later Mycenaeans were based on mainland Greece. Aegean art is quite enigmatic and is characterized by lively sculptures and wall paintings which mirror the natural world and the warmth of the Mediterranean.
What is the Quran?
Like Christianity and Judaism, Islam is considered a religion of the book because at its heart lies the Quran, Islam's holy text. It contains the revelations of the Prophet Muhammad as received from God through the angel Gabriel in 7th century Saudi Arabia. The Quran is made up of 114 chapters, called surahs, and 6,000 ayat, or verses. The Holy Book explains the 5 pillars of Islam, which are 5 duties required by all Muslims, and serve as the foundation of the Islamic faith. Written in Arabic, the Quran could not be translated until recently. And Qur'ans throughout art history are known for their high-quality Arabic calligraphy and mesmerizing visual design.
What is St. Peter's Square?
St. Peter's Square is far from rectangular. From an aerial perspective it actually looks like a keyhole, an oval next to a trapezoid. The space serves as a grand entrance to St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican, the heart of the Catholic Church. It is defined by a quadruple road colonnade that extends from the basilica's facade and then wraps around an ovoid piazza, framing a central obelisk brought from Egypt by Roman Emperor Caligula. The shape of the colonnade has been described as a mother's arms that reach out from the church to embrace the worshippers who gather there. Gian Lorenzo Bernini's design for St. Peter's Square, known in Italian as Piazza San Pietro, is probably his best-known architectural project. It was an incredible challenge to design a space that could contain the crowds that come to the Vatican to hear the Pope, and to unify a space that contains styles from so many different periods of history. Bernini's design included hundreds of columns and pillars, along with hundreds of statues of saints. Like the Church of Il Gesù, Bernini's Piazza San Pietro incorporates many different architectural elements, and yet it maintains a grand and harmonious feel.
What is the difference between Christian and Islamic architecture?
When looking at examples of Christian and Islamic religious architecture, one might be surprised that there are often many similarities. Both churches and mosques often feature central domes, and some early mosques, like the Dome of the Rock, resemble centrally planned churches in their use of the ambulatory, while the nave of a basilica-plan church is often filled with pews. Mosques have open floor plans, which allows Muslims to kneel and pray using prayer rugs. The exterior of a mosque is notable for its tall minarets, which are not used in church architecture, though both styles emphasize monumental height and grandeur. In terms of decoration, many, though certainly not all, Christian churches are filled with mosaics, painted narrative scenes, and stained glass windows featuring stories from the Bible. Mosque decoration also features passages from the Quran, however. This is visualized using calligraphy, due to Islam's iconoclastic approach to art. Both early churches and mosques rely heavily on mosaics for decoration.
Who were key Proto-Renaissance painters in Siena?
(13th and 14th century Siena, about 40 miles southwest of Florence), was a hotbed of late Gothic, pre-Renaissance art production. The art of Siena rivaled that of any other city of the age. One of the most important artists working in Siena, Duccio di Boninsegna, referred to simply as Duccio, is considered to be the father of Sienese painting. Duccio is known for the Maesta altarpiece he made for the Siena Cathedral between 1308 and 1311. This piece is influenced by earlier Byzantine styles of art. The enormous altarpiece, originally made up of over 50 panels, is dominated by red and gold colors and presents the Virgin Mary enthroned as the Queen of Heaven in the center panel. Her highly decorative throne opens up as if welcoming viewers into an embrace. A big change from the flatness of earlier Gothic and Byzantine images. Mary is surrounded by a sea of saints, each framed by the flat disk of a halo behind the head. The infant Christ, imagined as a small man, sits weightlessly in Mary's lap. Unfortunately, this beautiful example of Sienese art was dismantled in the 18th century and sold piece by piece to museums and private collections. Some remaining pieces have been reassembled and are on display in the Siena Cathedral.
What is Scarabray?
Scarabray is a seaside Neolithic settlement on the Scottish Orkney Islands, which are situated in the far north of the country. The relatively small Scarabray was inhabited between 3100 and 2600 BCE. Thousands of years after Near Eastern settlements such as Jericho and Kittilhuyuk, and was constructed of stone due to the lack of timber on the islands. Whereas other populations on the British Isles did not settle until nearly the Bronze Age. Evidence of settled life at Scarabray includes discoveries of cooking tools, decorated pottery, and stone-carved furniture such as beds and dressers. The fact that stone was a primary building material resulted in uniquely well-preserved examples of Neolithic art and architecture in Northern Europe.
What is the Mayan Codex style?
Artists, held in high regard in Mayan society, wrote hieroglyphs and made illustrations in ancient folded books called codices. There is a clear link between the style of the art produced in these codices and other types of art, such as painted ceramics. Mayan Codex style art is filled with expressive characters and bold colors. These paintings, whether in a book or on a vessel, have text which helps to explain the meaning of the images. These hieroglyphic inscriptions sometimes represent images, and are therefore pictographic, and sometimes represent sounds. A system of dots and bars was used to mark time. Scholars think it was common for the writing and the illustrations to have been completed by the same person, and refer to them as artist scribes.
What is Roman illusionism?
The ancient Romans were known for their beautiful paintings, which they used to decorate the interiors of domestic residences. These paintings often created the illusion of space, much like a theater backdrop, and featured elements such as faux architectural motifs and outdoor scenes. The Villa of Phanius. Sinister in Italy has some of the most important surviving wall paintings from the Roman world. The villa was buried by volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 BCE. Nearby Pompeii was also destroyed, and was excavated in the early 20th century. Many of the paintings here feature objects painted using the trompe-l'oeil technique, which means trick of the eye. For example, an image of a glass vase in the painting looks so real that it appears to exist in three-dimensional space. These illusionistic wall paintings were a status symbol for the wealthy Romans who filled their villas with them.
Who was Winslow Homer?
Winslow Homer, 1836 to 1910, was an American painter who worked as a magazine illustrator and war correspondent during the Civil War. He is known for his depictions of leisure activities and outdoor scenes, and like Thomas Eakins was a proponent of realism. Though his work is characterized by its nostalgia for the simplicity of the pre-industrial era. His painting, Snap the Whip, 1872, monumentalizes a traditional children's game and includes a depiction of a one-room schoolhouse and boys dressed in simple, country clothes with no shoes on. The scene is in stark contrast to the pain of the Civil War and the changes brought on during its aftermath and during the Industrial Revolution.
What is Paleolithic art?
In Greek, palea means old and lithos means stone. Paleolithic art is therefore Artei created during the Old Stone Age, which lasted from about 35,000 to 8,000 BCE. During the last Ice Age, the Paleolithic period was characterized by the human use of stone tools. People of this period were migratory hunter-gatherers who sought shelter near rocks and caves. Art of this time is the oldest ever discovered, and fascinating examples include cave paintings, rock paintings, and stone sculpture.
Why is Borobudur considered one of the greatest Buddhist temples in the world?
The mountain-like Borobudur is an enormous Buddhist temple built in the 9th century in Java, Indonesia, and not discovered by outsiders until the 19th century. Based on the stupa form, the temple is covered in ornate sculptures and staircases oriented to the points of the compass. The mountain form is no accident, it is in fact a key element of the temple's complex symbolism.
Who were the Limborg brothers?
The three Limburg brothers were the most famous manuscript illuminators in Flanders. and worked near the end of the 14th century and the early 15th century. Paul, Hermann, and Jean were originally trained as goldsmiths in Paris and went on to become the official court painters to the Duke of Berry around 1404. Arguably their most important work was the Trace Riches Heures, a book of hours made especially for the Duke. The book included calendar pages, which listed saints' feast days, zodiac signs, and astrological information. The Limburg brothers completed fantastically realistic, full-page paintings for each month of the year. The paintings are full of life and vivacity, for example. The deep blues and powdery whites of the February page evoke the chill of winter. The brothers used very fine brushes, and most likely magnified lenses. In order to achieve such a high level of detail. The work of the Limburg brothers is a good example of the international Gothic style.
Who was Manet?
Eduard Manet, 1832–1883, is considered by many to be the first modern painter. He not only bridged the gap between realism and impressionism, but his work foreshadows early 20th century painting styles and approaches. He was highly knowledgeable about art history, and fiercely rebellious. Preferring art he deemed sincere, rather than perfect. Along with thousands of paintings by other premier artists of his day. Manet's work was rejected by the Salon, the official art exhibition of the Palace of Fine Arts. But, Manet had the opportunity to shock critics and viewers at a specially organized Salon de Refuses, or Salon of the Rejected, with his painting Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. The Luncheon on the Grass, 1863, and again in 1865 with another masterpiece, Olympia. Though Manet's work drew inspiration from the great masters, he focused on scenes of modern life, including café and leisure scenes around Paris, war paintings and lithographs inspired by contemporary literature. His work is among the most critically acclaimed and valuable in all of art history. However, Manet never achieved this kind of universal recognition during his lifetime. Now, he is considered one of the founding fathers of modern art.
Who was Caravaggio?
Michelangelo Merisi, 1571–1610, better known as Caravaggio, was a complicated artist. He never had a workshop or any apprentices, and seemed more comfortable in the dark alleys of Rome than in the grand churches and palaces of his high-status patrons. Prone to violence, Caravaggio frequently ran into trouble with the law. In 1606, he killed a man in a street fight, prompting the Pope to issue a warrant for his death. He was, however, one of the greatest naturalist painters in history, and his powerfully realistic paintings promoted Christian themes of redemption and salvation. Caravaggio was also a skilled still life painter. One of his most notable still lifes is Basket of Fruit, 1597. Against a yellow background, a wicker basket filled with aging fruits and leaves sits on a window ledge. The purple grapes are starting to turn a moldy gray color. Green leaves are wilting, some are covered in brown spots. A red and yellow apple is browning around two apparent wormholes. The former sheen and health of this fruit is apparent, but only a slight tinge of life remains. The basket of fruit is so close to the picture plane that it is almost confrontational, forcing the viewer to notice the passing of time. The painting has been interpreted as symbolic of the fleetingness of youth and beauty.
What is embroidery?
Embroidery is a textile art found all over the world in which threads are decoratively sewn onto finished cloth such as wool or silk. Although the 11th century textile, the Bayeux tapestry, is referred to as a tapestry, it is actually an example of embroidery. This 230-foot-long masterpiece depicts the Norman conquest of England in 1066. For more information, see the chapter on the medieval world, c. 400-1300.
What is a daguerreotype?
A daguerreotype is the earliest form of photograph. Invented by the French painter, Louis-Jacques de Daguerre, 1787–1851. In the 1830s, J.N. Niepce had experimented with iodine fumes, and others experimented with additional photosensitive chemicals in an attempt to make a high-quality image. Daguerre later used a silver iodide-covered copper plate and mercury fumes to make a single fixed image. The invention was considered a huge boon for France, and it revolutionized the way history could be recorded. Daguerreotypes became very popular for portraits, but by the latter half of the 19th century, photography techniques that allowed for multiple prints instead of a single image replaced the daguerreotype.
What does the Farm Security Administration have to do with art?
In 1935, the Farm Security Administration, FSA, was established in order to document and communicate the devastating impact of the Great Depression, especially on farm workers and the rural poor. American economist Roy Stryker hired a team of photographers that included Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange, among others. Walker Evans, 1903 to 1975, had studied literature in Paris and was direct in his approach to photography. His work powerfully documents struggling families, notably in West Virginia, during the period between World Wars I and II. Dorothea Lange, 1895 to 1965, had a photography studio in San Francisco, but when hired by Roy Stryker, she traveled to see firsthand what migrant farm workers had to endure. Her photographs, including Migrant Mother, 1936, Migratory Cotton Picker, 1940, and Wife of a Migratory Farmer in Her Makeshift Tent Home, are eloquent and forceful.
What is Rococo?
Rococo is a distinctive style of art, architecture, literature, music and more, popular during the 18th century in Europe. The name comes from French, and is a blend of the words stones and shells. Both popular items in 18th century gardens. Like many other terms such as Gothic and Baroque, the term was created much later and used to disparagingly describe what 19th century critics considered the gaudy, bad taste of the 18th century. Rococo architecture is highly ornate, and characterized by curving, rather than rigid forms, pastel colors, and an element of fantasy or whimsy. Painting also features pastel colors and witty, frivolous scenes of aristocratic lovers and mythological figures. Though there are occasionally cynical undertones in some Rococo paintings. For example, in the prints and paintings of William Hogarth. Rococo first developed as a cohesive style in Paris, and is specifically associated with the French King Louis XV and the rise of the bourgeois, or upper middle class. As with other categories of art, regional differences lead to variation of Rococo style. Important Rococo painters include Jean-Antoine Watteau, Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and Johann Balthasar Neumann, among others.
How is pre-Columbian art in North America organized?
In North America, pre-Columbian art is divided into three major periods: Archaic period, ends in c. 1000 BCE, Woodland period, c. 300 B.C.E-1000 CE, Mississippian period, c. 900-1500 CE.
Why did Jasper Johns paint the American flag?
Jasper Johns, 1930, is an American contemporary artist known for his painting, printing, and sculpture. His paintings frequently feature familiar objects and symbols such as targets, numbers, and the American flag. In line with the themes and goals of pop art, Johns was interested in using familiar objects in a new way. Rather than create new images, he wanted to depict things the mind already knows. As quoted in the Met Museum Timeline of Art History, he said that his decision to paint flags was inspired by a dream, and his realistic works serve to highlight the artificiality of the symbols he represents.
What was the Barbizon school?
The Barbizon school was a group of French painters who favored plein air landscape painting that broke with neoclassical conventions of idealization. The name of the group came from the small village of Barbizon where many of the founding artists lived. Artists of the Barbizon school, such as Charles-François Daubigny, Jean-François Millet, and Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, leaned towards realism and valued close observation of nature. Like artists before and after, they searched for truth, in the rural countryside of France. Although occasionally criticized, the artists of the Barbizon school, whose work is characterized by softness of forms and loose brush strokes, went on to influence 19th-century French realism and impressionism.
What is the meaning of the persistence of memory?
The Persistence of Memory, 1931, is Salvador Dali's most famous painting. In this work, Dali depicts languid, melting clocks draped over an arid, desert landscape. Unlike many of the other large, abstract works being produced at the time, the persistence of memory is quite small, not much bigger than an ordinary piece of paper. It is highly detailed and uncomfortably realistic for such a strange picture. Against a smooth and seemingly infinite horizon, are 4 liquid clocks. At the center, one of these clocks, really more of a pocket watch, curls over what appears to be a boneless, fish-like face. Another clock oozes off the side of a table-like surface, while another rests upside down, black ants aggressively gathered atop it. Dali himself compared the objects in the painting to melting camembert cheese, and the entire scene is fixed in an impossible state of timeless transformation. Although there can be no definitive definition of this painting, the work is a meditation on the unfixed nature of time and space.
Who were the Brahmins?
Felix Brachmond, 1833–1914, and his wife Marie, 1840–1916, were both artists associated with the Impressionist style and were part of the artistic social circle that included Degas, Rodin, Manet, and Whistler. Felix was mostly a printmaker and specialized in etching. He is credited with popularizing Japanese prints, known as ukiyo-e. Amongst the Impressionists, especially the work of Hokusai, Marie Brachmond was primarily a painter and began her career by designing decorative porcelain, which attracted the attention of Degas. Though largely absent from art history survey texts, Marie Brachmond was one of the premier women artists of the 19th century. Her career was not well supported by her husband, and she did not produce a body of work as large as her contemporaries. Mary Cassatt and Berthe Morisot, however, Her work was exhibited at the Paris Salon in 1874 and she exhibited at multiple Impressionist shows as well.
What is the Gero crucifix?
The Gero crucifix is a life-size sculpture depicting the body of Christ on the cross. Made of gilded and painted wood and meant to be suspended above an altar. The back of Christ's head was hollowed in order to hold communion bread used in the ritual of the Eucharist, as opposed to the triumphant pose of Christ as seen on the book cover of the Lindau Gospels. This representation of Christ emphasizes suffering. Christ's head hangs heavily and his body appears limp and frail. This is the first time in history that an image of dead Christ was depicted on the cross.